There's a particular kind of confidence that comes from believing you're untouchable. Aaron Hernandez wore like armor every single day he walked into that courtroom. He smiled at prosecutors. He leaned back in his chair like he was watching someone else's trial. And for a while, it almost seemed like he might actually walk away from it all. But confidence, real or performed, can't rewrite evidence. And the evidence in this case was about to tell a story that no amount of smiling could erase. If cases like this fascinate you, the ones where nothing is quite what it seems, subscribe. We dig into the stories that stay with you long after the verdict. Aaron Hernandez wasn't just any defendant. He was a household name, a tight end for the New England Patriots, one of the most dominant teams in professional football. He had the kind of career most athletes only dream about: a multi-million-dollar contract, endorsement deals, stadiums full of fans chanting his name. He was young, talented, and seemingly on an unstoppable trajectory toward greatness. But the man sitting in that courtroom wasn't the same person the cameras captured on game day. This was someone whose life had split into two incompatible realities, and a collision between them was about to play out in front of the entire world. When you're that famous, that successful, you start to believe the rules don't apply the same way. Not consciously, maybe, but somewhere deep down, you begin to think your status offers a kind of protection. Hernandez carried himself like someone who thought he was above consequence. Friends and teammates had seen glimpses of it before, that edge, that intensity that made him great on the field but dangerous off it. He was fiercely loyal to the people from his old neighborhood, the ones who knew him before the fame, before the money. That loyalty wasn't just sentimental. It was identity. It was proof that success hadn't changed him, that he was still the same kid from Bristol, Connecticut. But loyalty, when it's tangled up with pride and paranoia, can become something toxic. In June of 2013, something happened that would unravel everything Hernandez had built. The details are still debated, still dissected by people trying to understand how it all went so wrong so fast. But what's clear is this. Odin Lloyd, a semi-pro football player who was dating the sister Hernandez's fiancée, became the center of Hernandez's suspicion. The two men had spent time together just days before. They'd gone out, been around mutual friends, the kind of casual hangout that should have been forgettable. But according to investigators, something that night triggered Hernandez. Maybe it was a comment. Maybe it was a perceived slight. Something Lloyd said or didn't say that Hernandez interpreted as disrespect. Whatever it was, it festered. Hernandez was known to be paranoid. People close to him said he was constantly worried about being talked about, being crossed, being made to look weak in front of others. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. It's the product of growing up in environments where respect is currency, where showing vulnerability can be dangerous. But Hernandez wasn't in that environment anymore. He was a millionaire athlete with everything to lose. And yet, he couldn't let go of the code he'd grown up with. That tension, that inability to reconcile who he'd been with who he was supposed to be, created a pressure that was always looking for a release. In the early morning hours of June 17th, Odin Lloyd got into a car with Aaron Hernandez and two of Hernandez's friends. Surveillance footage from Hernandez's home security system captured the moment they left. For people in the car, the camera recorded the timestamp, the make and model of the vehicle, every detail that would later become evidence. Hours later, that same camera captured the car returning. But this time, there were only 3 people inside. Odin Lloyd wasn't with them, and he never would be again. A worker discovered Lloyd's body later that day, not far from Hernandez's neighborhood. The scene was brutal. Lloyd had been shot multiple times, left in an industrial park in the kind of position that suggested panic, haste, and violence. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. People who knew Lloyd described him as a good guy, someone who was trying to build a life, someone who had no reason to be caught up in something like this. And the sports world, which had celebrated Hernandez just weeks earlier, suddenly had to grapple with the possibility that one of their stars might be a killer. The investigation moved fast. Police traced Lloyd's last known movements, pulled his phone records, and found text messages between him and Hernandez from the night of his death. Lloyd had texted his sister shortly before he died, telling her he was with NFL, just NFL, It was the last message he ever sent. That text, combined with the surveillance footage and cell tower data, created a timeline that was damning. Hernandez's own security system had recorded evidence that would be used against him. The cameras he'd installed to protect his property had instead documented his movements on the night a man was killed. A few days after Lloyd's body was found, police arrived at Hernandez's home. Television crews were already there, cameras rolling as officers led Hernandez out his house in handcuffs. It was surreal. This was a man who had been on magazine covers, who had scored touchdowns in front of millions of viewers, now being arrested for murder. The Patriots released him from the team within hours. Endorsement deals evaporated. The life he'd built, the image he'd cultivated, collapsed in a single day. And yet, when Hernandez appeared in court for the first time, he didn't look broken. He looked defiant. That defiance became his signature throughout the trial. Hernandez smiled. He joked with his lawyers. He leaned back in his chair like he was watching a game film, not a murder trial. To observers, it seemed like arrogance, like he genuinely believed he was going to beat the charges. And maybe part of him did. But people close to Hernandez later revealed something that complicates that image. They said he was terrified, that behind the bravado, behind the smiles, was someone who couldn't handle the thought of prison, who had told friends he'd rather die than spend his life locked away. The confidence, it turned out, wasn't confidence at all. It was a mask, and like all masks, it could only hold for so long. The prosecution's case was methodical. They presented cell phone records showing Hernandez and Lloyd's communications in the hours before the murder. They showed surveillance footage from multiple locations, tracking the car's movements throughout the night. They brought in witnesses who testified about Hernandez's state of mind, his paranoia, his temper, and they presented physical evidence, shell casings, tire tracks, pieces of evidence that connected Hernandez to the scene. The narrative they built was clear. Hernandez had felt disrespected, and in his world, that disrespect demanded a response, a fatal one. Hernandez's defense team fought back. They questioned the reliability of the evidence, argued that the prosecution was making assumptions, and suggested that media coverage had poisoned public perception before the trial even began. They painted Hernandez as a dedicated father and fiancé, someone who had worked hard to build a life for his family. They emphasized his commitments, his relationships, his humanity. But the evidence was overwhelming, and as the trial dragged on, even Hernandez's composure began to show cracks. Observers in the courtroom noticed it first. The way his jaw tightened when certain evidence was presented. The way his eyes would flicker toward his fiancée, Shayana, sitting in the gallery. The way his hands, usually relaxed, would occasionally clench into fists. These were small moments, barely noticeable, but they hinted at the storm beneath the surface. Hernandez was performing calm, but the performance was becoming harder to sustain. And then, after weeks of testimony, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The words landed like a physical blow. Extreme atrocity or cruelty. The theory under which Hernandez was convicted wasn't just murder. It was murder committed with a level of brutality that the law reserves for the most heinous acts. Hernandez's face remained mostly still, but something shifted in his expression. The mask didn't crack completely, but it slipped just for a moment, just long enough to see the fear underneath. In 2015, Aaron Hernandez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were formal, clinical, the kind of language that reduces a human life to legal terms. Committed to MCI Cedar Junction for the term of your natural life. No possibility of parole. The sentence was final. There would be no appeals that could undo it, no technicality that could free him. Hernandez, who had once been one of the most celebrated athletes in the country, would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And for someone who had told friends he couldn't survive prison, that reality was unbearable. Life in prison is difficult for anyone, but for someone like Hernandez, it was a special kind of hell. He was famous, which meant he was a target. He was a former athlete, which meant he was expected to carry himself a certain way. And he was convicted of murder, which meant he was surrounded by people who had committed similar acts, people who understood violence in the same visceral way he did. But Hernandez wasn't built for that environment. Friends and family who visited him in prison said he was deteriorating, that the confidence he'd shown in court had evaporated, replaced by paranoia and despair. Letters Hernandez wrote during his time in prison revealed a man tormented by regret and fear. He wrote about his daughter, about the life he'd lost, about the choices that had led him to that cell. He wrote about isolation, about the crushing weight of knowing he would never leave, never see his family outside those walls again. And he wrote about fear. The fear he'd tried so hard to hide in court, the fear that had been there all along, was now the only thing he could feel. On April 19, 2017, less than 2 years into his sentence, Aaron Hernandez was found unresponsive in his cell. Prison officials confirmed what many had feared. He had taken his own life. The man who had smiled through his trial, who had acted like nothing could touch him, had been broken by the very reality he tried to deny. He was 27 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the sports world and beyond. People struggled to reconcile the image of Hernandez as an invincible athlete with the reality of his death. Some saw it as a tragedy, the culmination of a life marked by trauma, violence, and unresolved pain. Others saw it as an escape, a final act of control in a life that had spiraled beyond his ability to manage. Investigators found 3 handwritten notes in his cell, placed next to a Bible. The contents of those notes were never fully disclosed, but they hinted at the torment Hernandez had been living with, the guilt and fear that had consumed him. Hernandez's family filed papers asking the court to preserve all evidence related to his death. They had questions. They wanted answers. But those answers, if they exist, remain elusive. What's clear is that Hernandez's death didn't bring closure. It didn't undo the harm he'd caused or the life he'd taken. Odin Lloyd's mother spoke publicly after Hernandez's death, and her words carried a weight that no legal verdict could match. She talked about the tremendous loss, about losing her son, her best friend, the love of her life. She talked about the families who fight for justice without a voice, without the platform she'd been given. And she made it clear that Aaron Hernandez's death didn't change what he'd done, didn't erase the pain he'd caused. There's something haunting about Aaron Hernandez's story, something that goes beyond the facts of the case. It's the disconnect between who he was and who he tried to be. He was a kid from a rough neighborhood who made it out, who achieved the kind of success most people only dream about. But he never really left that neighborhood behind. He carried it with him, the codes, the paranoia, the belief that respect had to be defended at all costs. And when those old instincts collided with his new life, when the pressure of maintaining 2 identities became too much, something broke. People often ask whether Hernandez was truly broke enough to take his own life, or whether there's more to the story, some conspiracy or cover-up that silenced him. The truth is probably simpler and sadder than any conspiracy theory. Hernandez was a man who couldn't reconcile the person he'd been with the person he was supposed to become. He was someone who built his identity on strength and fearlessness, but who was, at his core, deeply afraid. Afraid of being disrespected. Afraid of being weak. Afraid of prison. And when that fear became inescapable, when the walls closed in and the mask finally fell away, he chose an ending that no one expected. Aaron Hernandez's case isn't just about a football player who committed murder. It's about the fragility of identity, about how the things we're most afraid of can shape our choices in ways we don't fully understand. It's about the cost of loyalty when loyalty is tangled up with pride and violence. And it's about the consequences of believing you're untouchable right up until the moment you realize you're not. Hernandez thought he could smile his way through the trial, thought he could project confidence and make the evidence disappear. But confidence can't rewrite facts. And the facts, in this case, were undeniable. The legacy Hernandez left behind is complicated. He was a talented athlete who brought joy to fans and excitement to the game. But he was also someone who took a life, who caused immeasurable pain to Odin Lloyd's family, and who ultimately couldn't face the consequences of his actions. His story doesn't have a clean moral, no easy lesson that ties everything together. It's messy and tragic and frustrating in the way real life often is. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the value in telling this story isn't in finding some tidy conclusion, but in sitting with the discomfort of it, in grappling with the reality that people are more complicated than heroes or villains, that even someone who seemed to have everything can be undone by the weight of their own choices. What do you think? Was Aaron Hernandez's confidence in that courtroom real? Or was it all performance, a desperate attempt to hold himself together? And what does this case reveal about the pressures athletes face, the identities they're expected to maintain, and the cost of never being allowed to show fear? Share your thoughts in the comments. This case stays with me. The tragedy of it, the waste of it, the lives that were destroyed by choices that didn't have to be made. If it moved you too, if stories like this matter to you, hit that like button and subscribe. We cover the cases that deserve attention, the ones that challenge us to think deeper about justice, consequence, and what it means to be human. Thanks for watching.